Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games. Today we continue my top 100 board games of all time. Last time we covered games numbers 30 through 21. Today we're going to be talking about games numbers 20 through 11. So we're getting very close to the top of the list. Without any further ado, let's get straight to the list. My number 20 board game of all time is Villainous, and in particular, the Marvel iteration of Villainous. This game, Villainous, comes with lots of different themes. We have a Disney iteration, and we also have a Star Wars rendition as well. It's a very asymmetric game where each player is going to control a Marvel villain, not a superhero. And basically, while they are contending with one another, much of that comes across through this Fate deck, which has lots of different heroes from across the Marvel universe. And these different heroes are going to mess with your little player board, your little player area, interfere, block certain actions and what have you. And that's something that you have to contend with. It's very asymmetric because instead of having an overall winning condition or endgame condition, instead, each individual player has a very nuanced and specific victory condition according to the character that they control. And the victory conditions feel very thematic. So whoever's winning, whoever's playing is trying to accomplish something different than the other players around the table. And as you are trying to overcome and accomplish your objective, you're also looking around the table, paying close attention to make sure that nobody else is close to accomplishing theirs. It's really cool because basically each turn players move their player piece across their player board, and their player board has 5 designated areas, and each of these areas trigger particular combinations of actions. And you can never move to one location back-to-back turns. So you're always going to have to move your player piece from one location to another. You can never go back-to-back, so you're going to have to at least go 1 or 2 turns in between your favorite spots. And each of these spots trigger different actions like drawing cards or playing fate cards that mess with your opponents or attacking enemies that are in your player board or even playing cards. And sometimes these locations trigger multiple of these actions. Another very important action is generating income, generating money, because without money, there are certain cards and certain actions that you will not be able to take. Just a really cool game, very thematic, as I mentioned. I've only played the base game. There's 5 villains in the base game, but there are a lot of expansions just within the Marvel universe. My number 20 board game of all time, Villainous, Marvel. My number 19 board game of all time is Warhammer Invasion, the card game. And this is another one of the competitive LCGs from the Fantasy Flight line of games. This is another one that's out of print, fantasy-based theme with lots of different races. You got your orcs, you got your elves, you got your dwarves. Each player is going to control one of these Warhammer Old World factions and build a deck based on that. And basically each player has 3 areas in their player board that they're trying to defend. And players are, when they're attacking the player, they're actually attacking their city, if you will, their home base. And it's represented by this board that has 3 particular sides to it. And each side, you're trying to defend, you're trying to build forces on each side. So when you play cards, you don't just play them generically in front of you, you place them on one of the corresponding sections of your city. And if a player is able to destroy 2 of your sections, 2 out of your 3 sections, then you are eliminated from the game. And this is basically winners take all. A player has to outlast all their other opponents. This is 2 to 4 players, so you can play with multiple people. And each of these different sides of your city has a particular HP or hit points or health threshold that people need to surpass. And again, your characters are protecting the different units that you send out to each of these locations are going to protect. But not only that, each of the different sections of your city actually help you in different ways. Some of these sections allow you to draw more cards if you are able to if you're able to place multiple units there. In other sections, some of these will give you more defense or more attack or different other benefits. So you're building your units across your city, not only factoring in which of your sections is most vulnerable, most susceptible to attack, but you're also factoring in and balancing out the fact that some of these sections of your city are going to give you better abilities than others, or at least more useful abilities for your particular circumstances. Very asymmetric. Each of the different factions has different strengths and weaknesses. Really cool. My number 19 board game of all time, Warhammer Invasion. Now we move on to my number 18 board game of all time, another fantasy themed game, and that is Role Player. And Role Player, while it has a fantasy theme to it, in many respects, it's just a dice game, well, a little bit of a puzzle, very reminiscent of Sagrada, although Role Player did come out before Sagrada. Players are rolling their dice, and they're picking dice from a bag, and there's multicolored dice corresponding with different aspects or different characteristics of the fantasy genre. And you're rolling these dice and you're trying to place them in your player board, which represents your character sheet. Each player has a character with a particular fantastical race, and it's kind of like you're building a character in Dungeons and Dragons, because you have all these different stats like strength, wisdom, and constitution. All the typical RPG tropes are represented there, and you're trying to get particular stat thresholds. Sometimes you actually don't want to get too high of dice rolls, because you have a certain range that your particular stat needs to be within for you to score the most amount of points. In other areas, you are going to want to get as high as possible, and there's so many different ways of mitigating the dice roll. And there's lots of expansions that I have not played yet. I think they might actually help the game a lot, because it does feel very vanilla, very puzzly, very just an abstract puzzle in the base game alone. But I think some of the expansions might make it feel a bit more of a immersive or thematic experience. My number 18 board game of all time, Role Player. Now we move on to my number 17 board game of all time, and that is Marvel Overpower. And this game here, long out of print game that I believe just recently had some type of Kickstarter project where they brought the game back with a generic fantastical theme. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments down below. But I know that originally in the 1990s, when this game first came out, it had a Marvel theme to it. And then they had a spin-off with a DC Comics theme. And basically this was very early on in the history of the collectible card game genre, very shortly on the heels of games like Magic the Gathering and Pokemon. And I think this might have actually preceded Pokemon. And again, it's a collectible card game. It's very tactical, two-player, 1v1 type of game, but it's very different than Magic the Gathering. A lot of the games that I like in this style, this CCG, LCG style of game, are very, very similar to Magic, but I feel that Overpower is very unique in that sense. I like the collectible aspect. I love the Marvel theme. I mentioned it time and time again throughout the series of these videos. I'm a big Marvel nerd, and anything that has a Marvel intellectual property on it has a very good chance of appealing to me, and this game is no different. You build your decks. You have 4 different characters. They could be heroes, they could be villains, they could be a mixed match of both. And you have your 3 starting heroes who represent your front line, and you have a reserve 4th hero who will come in once the first of those 3 starting heroes is eliminated from the game. Players are trying to eliminate all 4 of their opponent's different characters, and that is how they win the game. Really fun, enjoyable game. I have lots of content for it. It is a bit hard to find because a lot of it is out of print, but there are some people on eBay that sell these cards for a pretty reasonable price. My number 17 board game of all time, Overpower. And now we move on to my number 16 board game of all time, and that is Hail Hydra, yet another Marvel themed game. And this, I believe, will be the highest party style game on my entire top 100. I believe this is the 4th or 5th party style game that I've had, and many of them, if not all of them, no, not all of them, but a lot of them have had this kind of secret hidden role, secret trader type of theme to it. And Hail Hydra is no different from that. Basically, players all represent SHIELD agents, and there are some hidden or secret moles. There are people representing Hydra who have infiltrated SHIELD and are trying to take over from within. And basically, a little bit less than half the team will represent those hidden secret Hydra players. But players are all trying to be covert, and they're trying to blend in with everybody else. We're going on different missions. Obviously, the SHIELD players, the true SHIELD agents, want the missions to succeed. The Hydra players want the missions to fail, very similar to games like Resistance. And basically, every player also has a particular character, which is an actual superhero from the Marvel Universe that gives them a once per game ability. It's very interesting. You got to know when to pull the trigger. Really cool game. You're trying to protect the city of New York from all these different villains, and depending on the player count, you have 4 or 5 villains you go through, and you're trying to defeat them. But again, the Hydra agents, they do not want you to succeed. Really cool game. My number 16 board game of all time, Hail Hydra. Now we move on to my number 15 board game of all time, and that is Android Netrunner. This is from Fantasy Flight Games, and we're seeing a little bit of a theme, a little bit of a trend here in this set of 10 games. We're seeing lots of Marvel-themed games. We're seeing lots of card-based tactical games, living card games, or collectible card games. Android Netrunner here, originally, the original Netrunner was designed by Richard Garfield, but then Lucas Litzinger of Fantasy Flight Games kind of rebranded it, retweaked it with an Android theme, the Fantasy Flight Android intellectual property that they've been using for many games over the last 10 years. And this game here has this really cool cyber hacking theme to it, where one player represents the Netrunner and the other player represents the evil corporation. There's this futuristic dystopian universe where these evil corporations have kind of taken over the game, and there's several different corporations for one player to choose from, and there's several different runners for another player to choose from. I guess another theme from this set of 10 is that these games are all very asymmetric. Villainous is a very asymmetric game. Warhammer, Overpower tend to be asymmetric just due to the deck composition that players will go through. A role player is asymmetric because depending on the player race and your particular objective cards, that's going to determine what you aim for as far as choosing the dice you select. And then again, Android Netrunner is just so asymmetric. It's perhaps the most asymmetric game I've ever played, because not only do you have different winning conditions, as I mentioned earlier with Marvel Villainous, but you also have different terminology. Your deck of cards is not going to have the same term referred to it as the deck of cards of your opponent. Same thing with your discard pile. Same thing with your trash cards. Same thing with all the different cards in your area. Lots of your particular card types within your deck are not necessarily card types that are found in your opponent's deck. You basically have different types of games. The corporation is kind of playing a game of chicken, where they have certain missions that they're trying to accomplish, but the Netrunner doesn't know which of these key locations that they hold have the most important information for them, and they're trying to hack the right servers in order to accomplish this. So if you can just delay the Netrunner in succeeding and finding out these key locations, you can pull off the victory. It's just a fun game. I like the tactical card game. I like the asymmetry of it all. My number 15 board game of all time, Android Netrunner. Now we move on to my number 14 board game of all time, and that is Nations, the dice game. And this is probably the least asymmetric game in this list of 10. Basically, this is a civilization-themed game with a dice-rolling Yahtzee-style mechanism. Players are trying to generate food. They're trying to generate military. They're trying to generate different resources to help them construct different buildings. The different buildings will not only trigger or get you additional victory points, which is the goal of the game, but they're also going to get you additional resources. They're also going to get you additional dice to your dice pool, which is very important, because at the beginning of the game, you start with your basic generic dice that do a little bit of everything. But as the game progresses, you're accruing these different dice that zero in on particular emphases in the game. So for example, you get your food dice are going to generate more food for you. You get your military dice that will generate more military icons for you. And all these things will help you in different ways according to the path that you take towards your end game goal. And again, you're just playing. Each player has a starting nation, and the nations are some of the generic nations from civilization games like Rome and Greece and Egypt and what have you. And in the base game, there is no difference from civilization to civilization. As they start the game, they start identically the same. It's as the game progresses and you recruit and acquire different buildings that you're going to distinguish yourself from the players around the table. However, the expansion does include a few additional nations, and each of those nations in the expansion do have a different startup. They have different buildings, different configuration of actions and dice that they roll from the very start that distinguishes them from all the other nations around the table. It's just a fun game. I like a good Civ themed game. I like the fact that it's dice rolling. I like the fact that it's short, it's small, and I could take it wherever I want to go. My number 14 board game of all time, Nations, the dice game. Now we move on to my number 13 board game of all time, and that is Clank, a deck building adventure. And I have enjoyed this game a lot. I have played the recent, well, not too recent, but the Catacombs expansion. I've played all the different expansions that come with the base game. I have just really enjoyed this game. I have not played Clank Legacy as of yet, but it's a nice fantasy themed board game with a deck building mechanism. I enjoy the deck building, I enjoy the fantasy theme, but I also enjoy the fact that this game took the deck building genre and didn't sell it short while adding to it by having this player board, which is basically the heart of the game as you're going and maneuvering through here and fighting different enemies and getting different treasure and getting different items. And you're doing this on the basis of the cards that you recruit. I find that sometimes games that have deck building plus tend to sell the deck building short, but that's not what Clank does at all. The deck building still feels so satisfying. You're still so interested in the lineup of cards in the market that you're deciding which ones to buy, which ones to acquire and add to your deck. Just a fun game. Really cool. Every time I play it, I don't win it often, but every time I play it, I have a very enjoyable experience. My number 13 board game of all time, Clank, a deck building adventure. Now we move on to my number 12 board game of all time, and this is a new game, relatively new to my experience and definitely new to this top 100, and that's Legend of the Five Rings, published by Fantasy Flight. And this is yet another living card game. A lot of these LCGs have made it to my top 100. And this one here debuts at such a high spot because of how different it feels from all the living card games in Fantasy Flight's catalog. And I really enjoy all of the living card games in Fantasy Flight. So it feeling similar to the other games would not be a knock against it at all. However, it does feel very unique. First of all, I love the Japanese fantastical theme that this game has to it. I love the artwork. It's so serene. It is so zen-like, so peaceful. I love even just staring at these cards as I play the game. But there's lots of little nuances, lots of little wrinkles that make this game stand out. First of all, players actually have two different decks that they're working with. They have their Dynasty deck and they have their Conflict deck. And these two decks correspond to different phases of the player turn where you're going to be playing these cards. There's two different phases in your individual player turn where you're actually playing cards in your player area that are going to trigger actions that are going to affect you, that are going to add units or characters to your lineup, to your player area. Really cool. You have this fate currency, which you're basically using to spend for your different cards, in particular your units, and also your other events and other cards that you can trigger. And you want to budget it and you want to manage it as well as possible. But what's really cool is that characters last only a certain while. They only have a certain amount of time that they will stay in your player area before they leave. But if you choose to overpay for your characters as you pay for them, then they will be able to last one turn longer for each additional fate token that you're willing to spend. So sometimes a really good, strong character might be worth you paying an extra 1 or 2 to place him down because he or she will last longer in your tableau if you overpay. Lots of really cool things. There is the end game condition or the winning trigger is to either get to a certain amount of honor, and honor is another currency in this game. So I believe it's 25. If you get to 25 honor first, you are the winner of the game. However, there's another potential winning condition, and that's getting your opponent to get to 0 honor. So as you're accruing honor, you're also losing honor. And if you lose too much honor, you can lose the game. And finally, there's a third actual winning condition, and that's defeating your player's stronghold. Your player's going to have 5 different locations that you are going to be trying to take over throughout the course of the game by engaging in combat in each of those locations. And after you defeat 3 of their regular provinces, they're called. They have 4 provinces plus their stronghold, a 5th location. Once you defeat 3 of their provinces, their stronghold is now eligible for battle, and now you can attack their stronghold. And if you defeat their stronghold, which is going to be a very tall task, but if you do, that's yet another way of winning the game. Now it's so cool because you have a draw phase during the player's turn. And when you do your draw phase, it's simultaneous, you and your opponent. And you're going to have this secret dial, and you're going to choose how many cards you want to draw. And you can draw anywhere from 1 through 5, and then you will simultaneously reveal it. Well, here's the thing. You don't want to go crazy with that, because although it will allow you to draw lots of cards, and these different cards are going to give you more options on your turn and in future turns. However, if you bid too high and your opponent chooses a lower number. The difference between the two is how much honor you will pay from your individual pool to your opponent's pool. So if there's a difference of 3, you're going to lose 3, and they're going to gain 3. So that's a total difference of 6. So you want to think that through. How desperate are you for that many additional cards? How much do you think your opponent is going to do? Because if you go too far, you're going to lose tons of honor. So many really cool things to think of. I've only played the base game, but there are lots of expansions. A lot of them are hard to find, but I've already gotten my hands on some. Really cool. I think this game has the potential to continue to climb as I explore it more. My number 12 board game of all time, Legend of the Five Rings. Now we move on to my number 11, the last game for this video here. My number 11 board game of all time is Legendary Encounters, and this is an alien movie themed game, the Aliens franchise from the late 70s throughout the 80s and even the 90s. And basically, this is a cooperative game. Players are going through the different movies. I think the base game has 4 different movies and characters and objectives that all correspond to what took place in these 4 different movies. And then some of the expansions add additional content representing some of the more recent films. This is such a cool game because you have a hive deck representing all the different aliens that are going into the complex, and they're going face down, so you do not know that. So there's a lot of hidden information, and some of the actions you take are scanning actions. It's a deck building game, and you're playing actions in order to scan some of these cards face down and reveal them. Sometimes you reveal cards that are irrelevant. Sometimes you reveal cards that have a reveal effect and they're very detrimental. Sometimes you reveal cards that trigger other events that hinder and hurt the players. And each player has an avatar with a certain amount of hit points. And as the aliens are attacking, they're striking, you're drawing these different cards from the strike deck. The strikes can represent anything from 0 damage all the way up to 5 damage. And once your player has taken, or your avatar has taken a certain amount of hit points, they are eliminated from the game, and your teammates are on their own to try to accomplish the game. It is such a fun game, very thematic. It does make you feel that suspense as you reveal the different cards, as you trigger these different actions. However, one thing is for sure, it's a tough game. It is a hard game to win, but it feels very much like the movie experience. Really cool game. My number 11 board game of all time, Legendary Encounters. And that's it for today's video, guys. Thank you so much for joining us here at When Harry Met Board Games. Don't miss us next time as we finally break into my top 10 board games of all time. Please comment down below. Tell me what you think about this particular set of 10. I'm interested in reading what you guys have to say. This is Harry saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.